Now, I'm much too young to remember the very first AFI Life Achievement Award back in 1973, but when they created this award, Denzel Hayes Washington Jr.
At 88 years old, the man the whole world knows as the voice of God is now living in pure heartbreak and pain. Once Hollywood's most powerful and commanding voice, Morgan Freeman can barely walk across the stage without struggling. His body is failing him right before our eyes. From the legendary icon we all grew up watching in the Shawshank Redemption, to the frail, exhausted, and confused 88-year-old man on the Jennifer Hudson Show. What the hell happened to him? The devastating tragedy behind Morgan Freeman's final years is more painful than you can imagine. Stick with me, because this story is about to get even darker. If you love real Hollywood tragedies, hit subscribe to Black Legend right now and turn on the bell notification. Chapter 1. Childhood of Crushing Poverty and Shattered Dreams. Born on June 1, 1937, in Memphis, Tennessee, Morgan Freeman came screaming into a world that already had its mind made up about boys like him. The youngest of his siblings, he was the son of Morgan Porterfield Freeman Sr., a struggling barber who would later drink himself to an early grave from cirrhosis, and Mamie Edna Revere, a hard-working teacher and laborer who fought every single day just to keep the lights on and food on the table. But right after he was born, the Great Migration pulled his parents north to Chicago, chasing any scrap of opportunity under the crushing weight of Jim Crow. They left tiny Morgan behind in Charleston, Mississippi, with his grandmother in a rickety wooden shack where the red clay dirt clung to everything like it never wanted to let go. That little boy grew up in a house so poor the walls whispered with the wind. No running water some days, no electricity others. His grandmother raised him on hymns, Bible stories, and the kind of tough love that came from knowing the world outside was built to break black boys who dared to dream too big. She filled his head with tales of resilience, but the reality outside their door was pure survival. Segregation wasn't just a word, it was the air he breathed. White-only signs, back of the bus rides, schools with torn books and broken desks. Yet even as a child, something burned inside Morgan. At just 9 years old, he stepped onto a school stage for the first time and felt it. That electric rush when the world disappeared and he became someone else. He won a statewide acting competition at 12. For one shining moment, the kid from the dirt floor shack saw a crack of light in the darkness. But life had other plans. When he was 6, his grandmother died. The one steady anchor in his world was gone. Suddenly, he was shipped north to Chicago to rejoin a mother he barely knew and a father who was already slipping away into alcohol. They bounced between cramped apartments in Chicago, short stays in Indiana, and back down to Greenwood, Mississippi. Always chasing work, always one step from eviction, always wondering where the next meal was coming from. Morgan watched his mother work herself to exhaustion in multiple low-paying jobs while his father's drinking tore the family apart. There were nights when dinner was nothing but a shake of milk and raw eggs because that was all they could afford. There were days he went hungry, stomach growling so loud it kept him awake, wondering why some kids got to eat 3 meals while he prayed for scraps. By high school in Greenwood, Mississippi, Morgan had already seen enough of the world to know the odds were stacked against him. He graduated in 1955, but instead of chasing that acting fire, he joined the United States Air Force. Not because he wanted to, but because it was one of the few doors open to a poor black kid from the South. He dreamed of becoming a fighter pilot, of soaring above all the dirt and pain below. For 4 brutal years he served as a radar mechanic, fixing machines instead of chasing the sky. The Air Force crushed that dream too. The racism, the rigid rules, the feeling that no matter how hard he worked, the ceiling was made of concrete. Disillusioned and heartbroken, he got out in 1959 with nothing but a few dollars and a burning question that haunted him every single night. Why was I even born? What the hell am I supposed to do with this painful life? Back in civilian clothes, Morgan took every dirty, back-breaking job he could find just to eat. Auto mechanic. Late-night janitor scrubbing grease and grime off airplane floors at the airport until his hands bled. He slept on cold floors in run-down shacks, red Mississippi clay still stuck under his fingernails, staring at the ceiling with tears he refused to let fall. The acting dream? It felt like a cruel joke now. He'd sneak into movies when he could scrape together the change, watching the screen like a starving man staring at food he couldn't touch. Every rejection letter, every slammed door, every "you don't look the part" or "we're not casting your type" felt like another punch to the gut from a world that kept telling him his place was in the dirt, not in the spotlight. Yet that fire never completely died. In the quiet moments, lying alone on that same cold floor, he would whisper his dream out loud like a prayer and a curse all at once. He didn't know it then, but every hardship, every night of hunger, every moment of soul-crushing loneliness was forging something unbreakable inside him. The boy from the Mississippi shack, the kid who lost his grandmother too young, the young man who watched his family splinter under poverty and racism. He was being shaped for something bigger. But right then, all he felt was despair. Life kept smashing his dream to pieces, and the hardest battles were still ahead. Chapter 2. Massive success, but sacrificing his family. But then, almost overnight, everything changed. In 1989, Morgan Freeman stepped onto a movie set for Driving Miss Daisy, and the entire world finally noticed the quiet fire that had been burning inside him for decades. When the 1990 Academy Awards rolled around, he stood there in a sharp tuxedo, heart pounding, as the nomination for Best Actor flashed across the screen. Hollywood had never seen a black actor like this before, calm, commanding, unforgettable. Even though the golden statue went to someone else that night, the doors flew wide open. Suddenly, Morgan wasn't the kid scrubbing airplane floors anymore. He was the man everyone wanted. The phone started ringing nonstop. Directors, producers, studios, they all wanted that deep velvet voice and that quiet intensity only Morgan Freeman could deliver. By 1994, The Shawshank Redemption turned him into a global superstar. Millions of people watched him as Red, narrating hope from behind prison walls, and they felt like he was speaking straight to their souls. Offers poured in faster than he could read them. He went from scraping by on janitor wages to commanding millions per picture. Private jets, red carpets, interviews on every major network. His voice became the sound of God himself when he played the Almighty in Bruce Almighty in 2003, a role that made audiences laugh, cry, and believe all at once. People literally called him the voice of God. Documentaries, commercials, trailers, everything sounded better when Morgan Freeman spoke. Success tasted sweeter than anything he had ever imagined back on that cold dirt floor in Mississippi. He could finally buy the big house, the nice cars, the security his family had never known. He married his second wife, Myrna Colley Lee, in 1984, and together they raised 4 children, Alfonso, Saifulaye, Dina, and Morgana. On paper, it looked like the American dream had finally arrived. But behind the flashing cameras, the price was devastating. The more famous Morgan became, the less he was home. Filming schedules stretched for months at a time, 6 weeks in Georgia for one movie, 3 months in South Africa for another, endless nights in Los Angeles sound stages. He would call home from hotel rooms at 2 a.m., voice exhausted, promising his kids, "Daddy will be back next weekend, I swear." But next weekend always turned into next month. Birthdays were celebrated over crackly phone lines. His daughter Dina's high school graduation? He was shooting in another country and could only watch a shaky video someone mailed him weeks later. His son Alfonso's championship baseball game? Morgan missed it because a director needed one more take. Myrna waited up night after night in their sprawling new home, watching the clock, wondering when the man she married would walk through the door again. The children grew up learning to hug their father through magazine covers and movie posters. Morgan would fly in for a quick weekend, exhausted and jet-lagged, trying to make up for lost time with expensive gifts and big smiles. But the kids could see it in his eyes. He was already mentally on the next set, thinking about the next line, the next role. In interviews, he would say with that famous calm voice, "I live for my work." And he meant it. The work had saved him from poverty. The work had given him purpose when the world told him he didn't deserve one, but that same work was quietly tearing his family apart. Late-night calls turned into arguments. "You're never here," Myrna would say softly. "The kids need their father, not a movie star." Morgan would hang up, stare at the ceiling of another anonymous hotel room, and feel the guilt settle heavy in his chest like Mississippi clay. He told himself it was temporary. Just one more big role. Just one more paycheck. Just one more chance to prove he had finally made it. Yet the years kept slipping away. The children grew into adults who barely knew the sound of their father's real voice outside of theaters. Holidays became awkward phone calls instead of warm family dinners. Morgan watched from afar as his kids navigated their own struggles, some with relationships, some with the pressure of carrying the Freeman name. And he felt powerless to help because he was always somewhere else, being the voice of God for everyone except the people who needed him most. He started to see the cruel irony. The same determination that had pulled him out of poverty was now pushing his family away. Every Oscar nomination, every standing ovation, every time a stranger stopped him on the street to say, "Your voice changed my life," came with the silent knowledge that he was missing soccer games, first dates, late-night talks with his wife. The success he had fought his whole life to achieve was slowly destroying the one thing he had always wanted, a real home filled with real love. In quiet moments between takes, Morgan would sit alone in his trailer, staring at old photos of his kids when they were little, and the regret would hit him like a wave. He had traded thousands of ordinary days for a handful of extraordinary ones on screen. He had given the world his best years, his best energy, his best voice, and in return, the world had given him fame, money, and respect, but taken away the simple joy of being there when his children needed him. By the time the 2000s rolled around, the cracks in the marriage were impossible to ignore. Myrna and the children had built lives that no longer revolved around waiting for Morgan to come home. He could feel them drifting, and deep down, he knew it was his fault. The boy who once lay on a dirt floor whispering, "What the hell am I supposed to do with this life?" had finally answered that question with fame and fortune. But the answer came at a heartbreaking cost. The real tragedies were still years away. And when they finally arrived, Morgan would look back on these golden years and realize that the greatest loss wasn't the roles he turned down. It was the family moments he could never get back. Chapter 3. The Tragedy of Granddaughter Idina Hines. But just when it seemed the worst was behind him, life delivered a blow so cruel it would shatter what little was left of Morgan Freeman's heart. Idina Hines wasn't just his step-granddaughter, she was the daughter he never got to raise. Born to his stepdaughter Dina from his first marriage, Idina had always felt like blood, pure, unconditional blood. From the moment she was a little girl with big, curious eyes and that same quiet intensity Morgan carried, he saw himself in her. While his own children grew up missing him on film sets, Idina became the one person who could pull him back to earth. She called him Papa in that soft, loving voice that melted every wall he had built around himself. He spoiled her rotten, flying her to premieres, buying her acting books, whispering encouragement when she dreamed of following in his footsteps. She even landed a small role alongside him in the movie 5 Flights Up. On set, the two of them would sneak off between takes, laughing like old friends, and Morgan would tell her, "You got the fire, baby girl. Don't ever let them put it out." She was 33 in 2015, beautiful, ambitious, and full of life. An aspiring actress living in New York, chasing the same impossible dream he once had on that dirt floor in Mississippi. Morgan would call her late at night from wherever he was shooting just to hear her voice and remind her she was never alone. "I'm always here for you," he promised her again and again, no matter what. For the first time in years, he felt like he was finally making up for all the birthdays and graduations he had missed with his own kids. Edina was his second chance at being the father and grandfather he wished he had been. Then came the night of August 16th, 2015. It was a little after 3 a.m. in Washington Heights. The streets were quiet except for the distant hum of the city that never sleeps. Edina and her boyfriend, Lamar Davenport, had been arguing. What started as words turned violent in a flash. Under the influence of drugs and alcohol, Lamar lost control completely. Witnesses later said they heard screaming echoing down West 162nd Street. Edina tried to run, but he caught her right outside their apartment building. In a blind rage, he stabbed her 25 times. 25 savage wounds to her chest, her back, her arms, as she desperately tried to protect herself. Neighbors heard her final, heartbreaking cries cutting through the night. "Why are you doing this?" She screamed it over and over, begging the man she thought loved her, as blood pooled on the cold New York sidewalk. She collapsed in the street, fighting for every last breath until the ambulance finally arrived. But it was too late. At Harlem Hospital, doctors pronounced her dead. Morgan was thousands of miles away when the phone rang. The voice on the other end, one of his family members, shaking, barely able to speak, delivered the news that stopped his world cold. "Papa, Edina is gone." He didn't scream. He didn't curse. He just stood there in the middle of his hotel suite, the phone slipping from his hand like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The man whose voice had once commanded millions now couldn't even find his own. He sank to the floor, knees buckling under the weight of a pain no Oscar, no fortune, no fame could ever protect him from. Back home in his sprawling mansion, Morgan locked himself away for days. The lights stayed off, the curtains stayed drawn. He sat alone in the dark, surrounded by silence so heavy it felt like the walls were closing in. In his trembling hands he clutched an old photo of Edina, the one from the set of 5 Flights Up where she was smiling up at him, proud and full of life. Tears streamed down his face without stopping. He kept whispering the same broken words into the emptiness. "If only I had been there. If only I had called her that night. If only I hadn't been so damn busy chasing another role." The guilt ate him alive. Every missed visit, every time he had chosen a movie set over family, every promise he had broken, now replayed in his mind like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. This wasn't just the loss of a granddaughter. This was the loss of the one person who still made him feel like a real man. Not the voice of God, not the Hollywood legend, but Papa. The boy from Mississippi who had survived poverty and racism now felt completely destroyed. His body, already battered by the fibromyalgia and the old car accident injuries, seemed to give up right along with his spirit. The pain in his left arm flared worse than ever. Nights became endless battles of tears and regret. He would stare at that photo until the sun came up, rocking back and forth, whispering apologies to a girl who could no longer hear them. Friends who tried to reach him said Morgan was never the same again. The quiet strength that had defined him for decades cracked wide open. He canceled appearances. He turned down scripts. For the first time in his long career, the man who had narrated hope for millions found himself with none left for himself. The tragedy didn't just take Edina, it ripped out the last piece of light in Morgan Freeman's world. And in the darkest hours, sitting alone with nothing but that photograph and the echo of her final scream still ringing in his soul, he realized the cruelest truth of all. No amount of success, no Oscar, no global fame could ever bring back the family he had slowly let slip away. The boy who once asked the darkness, "Why was I even born?" now found himself asking an even more painful question. Why am I still here when she's gone? The real tragedies were only beginning, and the loneliest chapter of his life was still waiting just around the corner. Chapter 4. Car Accident and Hellish Pain. But even before the nightmare of losing Edina tore his soul apart, Morgan Freeman had already been introduced to a different kind of hell, one that lived inside his own body and refused to leave. It was August 3, 2008. Morgan was 71 years old, still riding high on the wave of Hollywood success, but the years of constant travel and long shooting schedules had started to wear him down. That warm Mississippi evening, he was driving his Nissan Maxima along a quiet stretch of highway near Charleston, just a few miles from the red clay dirt roads where he had grown up as a poor boy. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep oranges and reds. He wasn't speeding, he wasn't distracted. But in one terrifying second, the car hydroplaned on a patch of wet pavement, spun out of control, and flipped violently, over and over and over again. The vehicle rolled multiple times before slamming into a ditch on the side of the road. Metal screamed. Glass exploded. Morgan was trapped inside the mangled wreckage, his body twisted at unnatural angles. His left shoulder shattered on impact. His left arm and elbow snapped like dry branches. The nerves in his left arm were ripped and crushed so badly that doctors would later say it was a miracle the arm wasn't completely severed. Blood poured from deep gashes. He was conscious for some of it, feeling every crushing jolt, every bone breaking, every nerve screaming in agony. The pain was so intense he could barely breathe. A passing motorist called 911, but it took the jaws of life nearly an hour to pry him out of the twisted metal coffin. Helicopters airlifted him straight to the regional medical center in Memphis while he drifted in and out of consciousness, whispering through clenched teeth, "Don't let me die here. Not like this." The surgery lasted 4 long hours. Doctors pieced his shoulder back together with plates and screws. They tried desperately to repair the damaged nerves in his left arm, but the damage was too severe. When he finally woke up in the ICU, the left side of his body felt like it belonged to someone else. Numb, heavy, foreign. He looked down and saw his left hand lying there lifeless. The doctors told him the truth. The nerve damage was permanent. He would never have full use of that hand again. The once powerful man who had commanded stages and screens now couldn't even grip a glass without help. But that was only the beginning. In the months that followed, a new monster crept in, fibromyalgia. The chronic pain condition exploded across his entire body like wildfire. It felt like someone was slicing him open with red-hot knives from the inside out. His muscles burned constantly. His joints throbbed. Even the lightest touch on his skin felt like fire. Nights became pure torture. He would lie in bed in his dark bedroom, staring at the ceiling, sweat pouring down his face while waves of agony rolled through him. Sleep? It became a distant memory. He would pace the house at 3 a.m., left arm hanging useless at his side, tears streaming down his face because the pain was so relentless he wanted to scream. To hide the trembling and swelling, he started wearing a black compression glove on his left hand. The same glove the whole world would later recognize as his signature look. But only he knew the real reason. It wasn't style. It was armor against the world seeing how broken he really was. He tried everything: medications, physical therapy, experimental treatments. But nothing fully stopped the fire. The man whose voice once sounded like God now sometimes had to pause mid-sentence because a fresh stab of pain stole his breath. On film sets, he pushed through takes with gritted teeth, smiling for the cameras while inside he was falling apart. He refused to complain publicly. He didn't want pity. He was still Morgan Freeman, the legend. But alone at night, the mask came off. He would sit in his big empty mansion, holding his useless left hand in his right, rocking slowly and whispering the same broken question he had asked as a boy on that dirt floor. Why was I even born, if this is what life had waiting for me? Then, just 2 years later, in 2010, another hammer fell. Doctors found stage 1 colon cancer during a routine checkup. The news hit him like another car crash. He had already survived poverty, racism, a near-fatal accident, and now this. Cancer growing silently inside him while he was still battling the fibromyalgia pain every single day. He didn't tell many people. He didn't want the headlines. He didn't want his family worrying from afar. Instead, he scheduled the surgery quietly and went through it almost entirely alone. Lying on the cold operating table, he stared at the bright lights and thought about all the times he had chosen work over being home. He thought about Adina, still just a teenager then, and wondered if he would live long enough to see her grow up. The surgery was successful, but the recovery was brutal. The fibromyalgia made every movement after the operation feel like fresh torture. He lay in the hospital bed, tubes in his arms, left hand still gloved and useless, wondering if this was the end. There were nights during recovery when the pain became so unbearable that Morgan Freeman, the man who had narrated hope to millions, came dangerously close to giving up. He sat alone in his room, staring at the bottle of pain pills, tears falling silently as he whispered, "I don't know how much more I can take. Maybe it's time to let go." The loneliness was worse than the physical pain. His children were grown and living their own lives. His marriage was already strained from years of absence. No one was there to hold his hand through the worst nights. He had given the world his voice, his talent, his presence. And in return, he was left to fight these demons by himself. The accident in 2008 didn't just break his body. It broke something deeper. The fibromyalgia and the cancer battle turned his golden years into a private war that no camera ever captured. He kept working because that's all he knew how to do. But every time he looked at his gloved left hand, every time a new wave of pain hit him in the middle of the night, he remembered how fragile everything truly was. The boy from the Mississippi shack had survived everything life threw at him, only to discover that the real war was still raging inside his own skin. And as the years pushed forward toward 88, that war would only grow quieter, lonelier, and more devastating. Chapter 5. At 88, the depths of utter loneliness. The cameras kept rolling, but something had changed forever. It was November 3rd, 2025. Morgan Freeman, now 88 years old, stepped onto the set of the Jennifer Hudson Show in Los Angeles. The studio audience erupted in cheers as he made his way down the famous Spirit Tunnel, the hallway lined with smiling staff singing and clapping. He was there to promote his new film, Now You See Me, Now You Don't. Still working, still showing up like the legend he had always been. But the moment the footage hit social media, the world froze. His steps were painfully slow and unsteady. His once powerful frame looked frail and thin beneath the tailored jacket. The left hand, still hidden inside that familiar black glove, trembled visibly as he gripped the railing. His eyes, those sharp, knowing eyes that had once stared straight into the soul of every character he played, now seemed distant and confused. When Jennifer asked him a simple question about his long career, his legendary voice, the one the whole planet called the voice of God, came out softer, slower, almost fragile. Fans flooded the internet within minutes. He looked so tired. Is he okay? This broke my heart. The man who had narrated hope for decades now looked like he was barely holding on. He flew back home the next day, straight to the one place that had always grounded him, his sprawling 124-acre ranch in Charleston, Mississippi. The same red clay dirt he had slept on as a poor boy now stretched out for miles around a massive, beautiful farmhouse he had built with the money from all those blockbuster films. It was a mansion by any standard, high ceilings, wide porches, rooms filled with awards, scripts, and photographs from 6 decades in Hollywood. But inside those walls, the silence was deafening. Morgan Freeman lives there completely alone now. His second wife, Myrna Colley Lee, divorced him back in 2010 after years of growing apart. The children, Alfonso, Saifulaye, Deina, and Morgana, have their own lives, their own families, their own careers. They call sometimes. They text. But visits are rare. The long distances, the busy schedules, the quiet understanding that their father had always chosen the next movie set over the next family dinner. It all added up. The ranch that should have been filled with grandchildren running through the halls and laughter echoing off the walls stands empty most days. The only sounds are the wind through the Mississippi pines and the slow, shuffling footsteps of an 88-year-old man moving from room to room. Every morning he wakes up before dawn, the fibromyalgia still burning through his body like it has for 17 years. The left arm, forever damaged from that 2008 car crash, hangs heavy at his side. He makes his own coffee with one good hand, stares out the big kitchen window at the empty fields, and wonders how the boy who once dreamed on that same dirt floor ended up here, rich beyond imagination, famous beyond measure, yet more alone than he had ever been in poverty. The days blur together. He reads scripts he can no longer commit to. He watches old westerns on the giant television in the living room because they remind him of simpler times. Sometimes he sits on the wide porch in the same rocking chair his grandmother used to sit in, the black glove on his left hand catching the sunlight, and just stares at the horizon. No assistance, no entourage, no one to ask him if he needs anything. The staff who take care of the property come and go quietly, respecting the old man's need for space. They know better than to linger. But the real pain comes at night. When the sun sets over the Mississippi countryside and the big house grows dark, Morgan Freeman does the same thing almost every evening. He lowers himself carefully into his favorite leather recliner in the media room, the one positioned right in front of the massive screen. He picks up the remote with his good hand, scrolls through the library, and chooses one of his own old movies. The Shawshank Redemption, Driving Miss Daisy, Bruce Almighty. Anything that takes him back to when his voice still thundered and his body still obeyed him. The screen lights up. There he is, young, strong, full of fire. Red narrating hope from behind prison bars. God himself walking through clouds. Miss Daisy's loyal driver with that quiet dignity that won him an Oscar. He watches himself the way a stranger might, tears already forming in his eyes before the first scene even ends. The voice that once filled theaters now feels so far away. The body that once moved with purpose now aches with every breath. He sits there in the dark, the only light coming from the television, and the tears fall freely. No one is there to see them. No one is there to wipe them away. He whispers to the empty room the same words that have haunted him for years. If only I had been there more. If only I had chosen them instead of the next role. If only I wasn't so damn alone right now. The fear is deeper than the pain in his bones. It is the fear of dying in this big, beautiful house with no one holding his hand. The fear that the last sound he will ever hear will be his own weak voice echoing off the walls with no one to answer. The boy who once lay on a cold dirt floor asking, "Why was I even born?" now lies in a multi-million-dollar bed at night and wonders if anyone will even notice when he's gone. At 88, Morgan Freeman has everything the world says a man should want. Oscars, millions, a voice that changed cinema forever. But in the quiet hours on that lonely Mississippi ranch, none of it matters. The fame is gone by midnight. The money can't buy back the family dinners he missed. The awards can't fill the empty chairs around his dinner table. He turns off the television, sits in total darkness, and lets the tears come until sleep finally takes him, if it comes at all. The legend the whole world still loves is slowly fading in the one place he calls home. And as the nights grow longer and his steps grow slower, the only thing left is the heartbreaking truth. After giving his entire life to the screen, Morgan Freeman is facing the final act completely, painfully, and devastatingly alone.